welcome to The Debate. Okay, let's just dive right in because there's a lot to unpack today. We are looking straight at the rhetoric around, frankly, national failure. Is what's happening in Europe and, by extension, what could happen or is happening here in America, is it really down to uncontrolled migration and these incredibly costly green energy policies, or is something else going on? And look, let's start with the first event, the migration situation. I'm going to call it what it feels like to many people, an invasion.
Oh, please. An invasion? Seriously? That term is an analysis. It's pure emotion designed to make people afraid and, frankly, to dehumanize folks fleeing desperate situations. You're painting everyone escaping drought or war or persecution as some kind of a hostile soldier. I just fundamentally challenge that premise. Are we under attack? Really? Or are we seeing the completely predictable result of massive global instability? Instability that, let's be honest here, historical powers, including European ones, had a big hand in creating.
The colonial legacy argument. Look, that's become such a convenient way to just sort of wash our hands of the chaos happening right now. We're talking about today, the visceral reality, not 1890. So how do you explain the breakdown of civil order, the official statistics? Sweden, right? Once the model of perfect Nordic order, now sees explosive attacks, grenades, linked to migrant gangs up by, over 1,500%? That's insane. And Germany, official figures, not speculation, non-citizens, about 12% of the population, they account for nearly 40% of violent crimes. 40. Europe's refusal to actually enforce its own borders and laws isn't some enlightened humanitarianism. It's a slow-motion surrender. It's political correctness leading to utter chaos.
Okay, hold on. That is such a deliberately selective reading of really complex situations. You're cherry-picking the scariest stats you can find while completely ignoring the economic reality. Immigration, when managed properly, is an engine for growth. If you want economics, look at Toronto. Integrated migrant communities there contribute $10 billion a year. Innovation, labor, new businesses. That's real. You're obsessed with policing fences instead of harnessing actual human potential. And this idea that cracking down works? Denmark got tougher, yeah? And what happened? It just pushed desperate people straight into the arms of human traffickers. It amplified abuses. You want to spend billions paying contractors to build walls that just cause more suffering? I actually want to create taxpayers who contribute.
We're talking about economic hemorrhage right now, not contribution, which brings us directly to the second point, the absolute necessity of swift, immediate deportation. I mean, if someone violates our laws, if they break the rules, or if they lodge an asylum claim that turns out to be false, and look at the data, the rejection rates are sky high, 90% plus in some categories. They have to be sent back immediately. It's the only firewall we have against completely unsustainable social strain and this crushing economic burden.
That approach feels profoundly un-American to me and just fundamentally cruel. When you talk about blanket deportation, you're talking about tearing families apart. You're talking about ripping U.S.-born children away from parents who are often doing the essential, back-breaking jobs that, let's be real, many native-born citizens don't want to do. And this whole argument about solving problems in their countries, that's such a convenient way to shrug it off. You know what it would actually take to solve poverty and climate instability at the source? Trillions, with a T. Trillions in fair trade deals, massive debt relief. Not just finger-wagging and threats from Washington.
Trillions? We can barely afford to house our own people. Seriously, look around. Our housing markets are insane, schools are overcrowded, buckling under the strain of this sudden, massive influx. When you see rejection rates that high, 90%, it proves the system is being ruthlessly gamed by people treating our borders like, a revolving door buffet. That's exactly why we need tough enforcement policies. Like, the Heritage Foundation blueprint lays it out. Mandatory e-verify, ending things like humanitarian parole abuse. That's how you deter the opportunists.
I reject this idea that desperation automatically equals opportunism. You're dismissing real trauma, real fear. The UNHCR data, the UN Refugee Agency, it's very clear. Something like 70% of asylum seekers are fleeing verifiable persecution, war, violence, political oppression. It's real. If claims get rejected, it's often because the system is overwhelmed, it's punitive, it denies people proper legal help, especially traumatized people. It's not because they're all lying. And your solution, just rush them out, deport, flood the detention centers, which, need I remind you, have a terrible track record for abuse and neglect. You want to solve scarcity by locking people up? I'm arguing that opportunity, real opportunity, is the actual path to safety and growth for everyone.
Quite the contrast indeed. Okay, look, before we dive deeper into the, frankly, serious consequences of these lax policies, we should quickly mention a resource that actually does a good job helping people sort through the kind of news landscape we're navigating here. The Next-Gen Business.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's genuinely useful. For anyone listening who wants to keep track of these kinds of stories, the evolving arguments, the data, we'd really encourage you to check out their free Become a Reporter challenge. Seriously, they have hundreds of reporters now getting millions of views every month. It's a great way to turn your own insights, your voice, into something that reaches people. It's a fantastic opportunity, really, to join the conversation in a meaningful way.
Indeed, a solid resource. Okay, now back to the conversation that is truly urgent. Let's move to the third major point, the issue of migrant overrepresentation in prisons. Look, this is direct, painful evidence of this failed experiment, this open borders fantasy. We can't just gloss over these numbers. Nearly half, 50% of German inmates are foreign nationals or migrants. In Switzerland, it's even more shocking. 72%. 72! Foreign-born individuals statistically commit offenses at rates triple those of native-born citizens.
Okay. When I hear stats like that, my first question is always, are we actually measuring criminality or are we measuring biased policing and systemic inequality? Because just throwing out these, frankly, cherry-picked incarceration stats ignores so much context. Migrants, especially visible minorities, often face racial profiling. They're disproportionately affected by poverty, which itself drives certain types of crime. And they often lack access to decent legal help. Plus, and this is huge, they live under this constant fear of deportation, right? Which means they are way less likely to report crimes committed against them. EU reports themselves suggest victimhood is undercounted by like 60% in these communities.
Bias policing doesn't explain gang rapes in Cologne. It doesn't explain the horrific knife attacks in Chemnitz. It certainly doesn't explain why actual authorities in Rotterdam felt forced to create specific migrant-only wings in their prisons. That's not profiling, that's a desperate response to a wave of imported criminality that our societies are just utterly unprepared for.
So you focus on the lurid headlines, the most extreme, highly publicized cases. But let's look at the bigger picture. Let's look at what actually works. Germany's own Justice Ministry studies show these higher rates often trace back to socioeconomic gaps and, crucially, failed integration. When they actually invested in integration programs, like they did in Berlin, recidivism rates dropped by 35%. The answer isn't building more walls inside prisons, it's building bridges, building opportunities, unlocking potential. You want to warehouse people? I want them paying taxes.
And I still maintain that contribution only really happens when deterrence is real, when it's absolute. Which leads us right to the next point, point 4. This so-called deterrence myth. I argue deterrence absolutely works, and the proof is right there. The Trump administration's Remain in Mexico policy, it didn't just slightly reduce illegal crossings, it cratered them. Illegal encounters dropped by 87% in just months. That's empirical evidence. That's success your side just conveniently wants to ignore. Your approach, it's basically a catch and release charade that just signals weakness and acts like a giant magnet for more illegal crossings and, yes, mayhem.
Wow, I genuinely think that shows a stunning misunderstanding of basic human desperation. The deterrence myth, especially the really punitive kind, it completely crumbled under its own moral and practical weight. Remember family separations? The peak of hard deterrence. It didn't stop people. It sparked global outrage and actually led to a 20% spike in asylum claims because traumatized people just became more desperate to get through. You don't deter truly desperate people with cruelty. You just push them towards even greater risks, often into the hands of smugglers.
What about Texas then? Governor Abbott puts up razor wire, physical barriers, and apprehensions in those specific sectors drop 60%. 60. Physical, visible enforcement sends a clear message, and it works in real time. History, I think, backs up the idea that sometimes you need an iron fist to defend your border.
And I'd argue that diplomacy works better and more humanely. Look at the Biden administration working with Mexico to increase their enforcement efforts. Encounters dropped 50% through cooperation and incentives, not razor wire and intimidation. Your kind of enforcement theater costs taxpayers $20 billion a year, money that could go to schools, healthcare, infrastructure. And for what? Proper humane vetting and integration create lifelong contributors who pay, over their lifetimes, something like $500 billion in taxes. You're trading actual long-term national prosperity for the cheap, short-term political thrill of looking tough at the border.
Okay, let's pivot now. This is incredibly serious. 5th topic, fentanyl, the cartels, the military threat. We have to be absolutely clear-eyed here. These transnational criminal organizations, they're not just gangs, they are narco-terrorists. Their supply pipelines, which are absolutely enabled by a porous, chaotic border, are killing over 100,000 Americans every single year. 100,000. That's a death toll that rivals wartime casualties. We must designate these cartels as foreign terrorist organizations, FTOs. That unlocks the legal tools, the military options for precision strikes against the kingpins, against their labs, their infrastructure. This is a war, and honestly, it demands annihilation, not appeasement.
I absolutely agree. This is a crisis of the highest order. The death toll is horrific, but these bellicose, sort of macho threats of military strikes, they risk escalating things into another endless, unwinnable war, destabilizing another region, creating more chaos. Haven't we learned anything from Iraq? And we need to be really laser-focused on the actual source of the poison here. A lot of the fentanyl scourge traces back much more directly to big pharma flooding our country with opioids in the first place. And the fact is, 90% of the precursor chemicals come, often legally, from industrial plants in India and China.
The precursors might start there, but the cartels are the weaponizers. They are the distribution network. They are leveraging our wide open border to embed themselves in our communities and pour this poison onto our streets, killing our kids. We have to target their operational leadership, their ability to function. And that, I'm sorry, requires more than just overworked DE agents. It needs the full force, including military options.
That this fixation on the macho mirage of drone strikes and military action, it just diverts billions from where it's actually needed. Public health solutions right here at home. Community-led treatment, harm reduction. Look at Portugal. They decriminalized drug use, treated addiction as an illness, not a border failure or a moral failing, and guess what? Overdose deaths plummeted by 80%. 80! You want to spend billions on missiles targeting labs in Mexico? I want to spend that money on rehab, on addiction research, and on global health packs that actually tackle the supply chain at its real origin points in Asia.
Let's talk about another major threat to stability. Point 6, the green energy policy agenda. I'm going to assert it's basically a scam, a costly scam, leading directly to national failure. Look at Germany's Energiewende, their huge forced energy transition. It's been a spectacular disaster. They had to fire up coal plants again. They wasted over 500 billion euros, and household energy bills went up 50%. This isn't just teething problems, it's systemic failure.
Okay, that's a very selective snapshot of a really complex long-term transition. Renewables aren't a scam. They are fundamental to our future economic salvation. Since 2010, the cost of solar has dropped, 89%? It's incredible. We're creating over 3 million jobs in the U.S. clean energy sector. That far outpaces the decline in fossil fuel jobs. And you cite Germany's struggles, but you conveniently forget they were phasing out nuclear at the same time and dealing with Russia yanking their chain on natural gas. You want to cling to the past, pretend sticking with coal and closing factories will save us? The rest of the world knows embracing this transition is how you actually build real lasting prosperity.
Prosperity built on unreliable energy? What about the UK? Their net zero policy, this fanatical pursuit, it shut down steel mills, Scunthorpe, 12,000 jobs gone, good, high-paying manufacturing jobs. And these economic failures, they just make the social fractures worse, especially when compounded by the costs of migrant overload. France is spending 20 billion euros a year on the social safety net for newcomers alone. That cost directly fuels the rise of these parallel societies, these no-go zones. You give up reliable energy, you give up sovereign borders, and you shatter your nation's economic and social fabric. It's happening.
And you completely ignore that embracing immigrants is often a huge strength, not just a drain. Newcomers in Sweden, despite the issues you mentioned earlier, still boost GDP by 1.5% annually, largely through entrepreneurship. You're focusing only on the short-term transition costs of green energy, totally missing the bigger picture. Energy independence, which is what renewables actually promise. Freeing ourselves from reliance on unstable regimes, building new industries right here, that is the definition of national resilience.
Resilience based on what? Intellectual folly? Which brings us to the final point, point 7, the long, embarrassing history of failed climate predictions. I maintain the credibility of these climate prophets is basically zero. Remember 1982? The UN's executive director predicting an irreversible global catastrophe by the year 2000. Flat wrong. Just completely, utterly wrong. These prophets of doom, these, frankly, sometimes stupid people, have cost countries absolute fortunes. Failed boondoggles like Solyndra, green levees crushing ordinary families, 13% energy poverty in the UK. It's a fear-mongering racket disguised as science.
Wow, okay, that's just a fundamentally flawed reading of history. You're confusing a warning about a dangerous potential path with some kind of absolute, set-in-stone prediction. Those early warnings may be dramatic in tone sometimes, yeah, but they galvanized the global action that actually averted the worst-case scenarios. Temperatures did rise, yes, but the investments in green tech, the international agreements, like the Montreal Protocol that healed the ozone layer, they curbed the original projections by 0.5 degrees Celsius. That literally saved us trillions in future disaster costs. It's like criticizing the doctor who warned you about lung cancer when you quit smoking and lived. You want to celebrate the doubt peddlers who profit from inaction? Well, I think we should honor the scientists who had the guts to warn us.
Averted catastrophe by making everyone poorer through higher energy bills? I'm sorry, I'm just not buying that justification. The cost has been immense, and the track record of the profits is frankly abysmal.
The real squandered fortune isn't the investment in green tech. It's the cost of inaction. We're already seeing a $2 trillion annual hit globally from worsening wildfires, floods, superstorms. That number dwarfs the transition costs. And those transitions birth global giants like Tesla. Your kind of revisionist history, just scorning the warnings, it only endangers the next generation who actually have to live with the consequences of all this.
Look, for me, the evidence from Europe, combined with the hard data on what actually works for deterrent, it proves that national sovereignty, strong borders, and reliable, yes, sometimes fossil fuel-based energy are the absolute non-negotiable foundations for a prosperous, safe nation. And we absolutely must remain fiercely skeptical of alarmist predictions that drain our wallets and freedoms without any guarantee of success.
And I'll stand by the position that this relentless focus on walls, punishment, and exclusion ignores our basic humanitarian duties, yes, but it also makes us poorer by forfeiting the huge economic opportunities that migration brings. And crucially, it utterly fails to address the real root causes: global inequality and accelerating climate change. At the end of the day, that kind of isolated, fearful thinking just weakens us against the truly massive shared threats we all face.
Well, clearly these are incredibly complex issues, deeply layered, tied into how we see ourselves, our nations.
Absolutely. And it's only really by digging into these challenges, by having these tough arguments and considering these, often really conflicting perspectives, that we can even begin to get a handle on the events shaping our world today. There's always more to explore.